Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Mythbusters in Research, part of our Your Voice in Health Research webinar series for Clinical Trials Week. I'm Dr. Meghna, CEO and co founder of Proba, and I will be your host for today. Now, before we begin, let's address the elephant in the room. When people hear the words clinical trials, they usually imagine one of the three things: someone in the white coat chasing them with a needle, a sci fi experiment gone wrong, or unfortunately, one becoming a lab rat. So, tonight, our mission is simple. We are here to bust myths, answer questions honestly, and make research feel human, accessible, and understandable. About Prober. A Prober is a clinical research matchmaking app. We believe research should not feel confusing, exclusive, or intimidating. Our goal is to make joining research studies easier, more inclusive, and more transparent for everyone. We work alongside researchers, healthcare professionals, and communities to help people better understand clinical research and how their voices genuinely shape the future of healthcare. Because the truth is, medicine's treatment and healthcare systems improve only when real people are represented in research. Here's how today's session will work. We'll spend around 30 to 40 minutes discussing some of the biggest myths surrounding clinical trials and healthcare research. After that, we'll open the floor for live question and answer session for around 20 to 30 minutes. So please keep your questions ready. No question is too small, too basic, or too awkward. Honestly, if you're thinking it, someone else probably is too. And finally, because we appreciate your time and participation, we'll also be doing a giveaway at the end of the session. One lucky participant will receive a £20 gift card, and the other will get a proper merchandise kit. So, yes, science can pay sometimes, actually, every time. So, here is our first panelist, Rebecca Paul. Hello, Rebecca.
Hi, you're right.
I'm good, thank you. So, we are
Good.
joined by Rebecca Paul, a clinical researcher with experience in patient focused research and public engagement. Rebecca is passionate about helping bridge the gap between researchers and communities, making research conversation more approachable and understandable. And thankfully for us tonight, she is also here to help separate facts from the internet myths that somehow survive longer because of these so called WhatsApp forwards. And next we have Kapil. Kapil brings frontline clinical research and experience offering insights into how clinical trials actually work in real healthcare settings. He has seen both the scientific side and the human side of research, which means tonight he will help explain what really happens behind the scenes and hopefully confirm that nobody is secretly growing extra limb from participating in trials. And then we have Rina. Hello,
Hi.
Rina,
Hi.
pharmacist and healthcare consultant. Rina has extensive experience in healthcare communication, medicines, and patient education. She is especially passionate about helping people make informed decisions without fear or misinformation. So, if you are ever Googled your symptoms and convinced yourself you had six rare diseases, Rina is exactly the kind of person you might need tonight. So, let me just hand the stage to these people. And, guys, everything is yours.
Thank thank you. So
Thanks.
hi everyone. I'm Rena. So I'm going to be chairing this webinar this evening, and we're really excited to get into a discussion about myths associated with clinical trials, and especially during clinical trials week. So we welcome everyone to be open, honest, we're going to have a very much a myth busting conversation. And as Megan has said, please do put your questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to them as we get through. So I think what we'll do is we'll start going to our panelists. So Kapil, shall we go with you first? If you want to briefly introduce yourself, and then tell us one myth that you hear about with regards to clinical trials, and we'll discuss that, if that's okay.
Sure. Thank you, Reena. Thank you so much. My name is Kapil. I'm one of the senior clinical fellow working at New Cross Hospital, Wolverhampton, in general surgery. So basically, I'm one of the surgeons here. I have a clinical trial experience in the past, working in multiple clinical trials during the COVID time, including the remdesivir introduction, including the safety of the plasma during the COVID period, as well as multiple clinical COVID vaccines when they were introducing. So I was working as a co-investigator in those trials. Now, coming to United Kingdom, working in one of the national clinical trial as a principal investigator, gave me an insight about this country as well. I have been participating as well in clinical trials as a candidate, as a participant. So that also gives me experience how we feel about from the patient or from the participant perspective. So combining all means merging all the experiences, and so I thought this is the best place to talk about my experience, as well as the people who want to participate or who participate, but they have few doubts, few questions about the trials, but they never open up, or they never comes to the platform and then discuss about it. So merging everything together, there are many myths people have. So I want to discuss about the common myth which I have faced overall in my experience. So are we going ahead, or are we?
Yeah, do you want to get into that first myth, Kapil?
Yeah, sure. So one of the myths I want to discuss is which I've been commonly asked, and I think it is one of the most important question when people feel that they want to get out of the trial, because they think the doctors don't tell you about what you are signing up for. So this is the most common myth. People ask that you go to the clinical trial, they give you all the details, and they force you to get into this clinical trial. So they hide information, or they don't tell you exactly what you are signing up. So first of all, if we reach the ground root, why this myth has evolved, or why this is one of the questions which people think, I think it's, if we go historically, it was, we have to accept that there were some unethical clinical trials, and particularly involving the marginalized communities. And this has been for real. There's no question about that. And I think that's one of the reasons that has created this image of clinical trials among the common people, among the laymen, that these clinical trials are basically trying to force people into the clinical trials unethically. But that's not true. There are kind of multiple things happen in the past, but we have to evolve from them, and we have learned from them. So nowadays the process is totally different. Now, one of the other reason why this myth has been evolved is because the consent process of for the participant during the clinical trial have been the old consent process, involved the rushing to get the consent quickly so that they can move on to the next step. It used to be jargon heavy, means there were multiple vocabulary were used which was not patient friendly or the participant friendly, I would say. And that has one of the reason that has evolved into this myth that you don't understand much about it, so that the people just have to participate. And then it used to be one directional also, means we just talk and talk and then talk, and the participant never get chance to ask the question. So that these were the reasons that this myth has involved. And as well as the last one I would want to mention, the reason is because the doctor and the patient has a bit of power imbalance. Sometimes the patient feel that he is not good enough to ask this question to one of the person who's basically knows everything about the body or everything about the medicine. So these are the reason that this myth evolved, that the doctor are hiding the information or they don't tell you anything. But I want to get clear that the consent process is not just a signature, it's the guidance from the GMC Montgomery ruling, which came afterwards, and they clearly focus that it has to be, all the information has to be discussed with the patient in the simple language. No medical jargon should be used. It is not just that you have to discuss all the information, you also have to focus on the patient specific information, which for that particular participant, which is more important. Maybe for my perspective as a kind of investigator, it may not be important for me. I may feel that this is something which is not as important as of other things, but it may be for that particular participant, it is the most important thing. It can be life changing for him. So these are the things I think later on, as we evolved and we included these rulings and we changed our process of consent, that has now, it is more patient friendly. Now we not just discuss the information verbally, we also give the written sheet. We give time for the participant to think about it. We use simple words. These are the things we have evolved and changed in our process. Nowadays, the clinical trials are more patient friendly, participant friendly. We give option of opting out anytime in the clinical trial. So it's not, we are not forcing anyone. We don't, the clinical trials never ask people to stay in throughout the process. Even if when they go home and they want to just cancel it, they can just ring up these days and then just say that we are not participating anymore. Nobody asks any question further. If you have any kind of, it's your choice, you want to stay in, you want to opt out any point. So these are things I think that over the time we have evolved. Now, another thing I want to mention is the ethical committee. So all the clinical trials go through the ethical committee process. So whatever the information, whatever the consent form you have signed, it's not just the doctor or the investigator and participant. It's also the ethical committee, which looks after all the consent forms, and they make sure that all the right words have been used, participants have not been pressurized, as well as there's no benefit to any of the person involved in the clinical trial. So that's why this clinical trial, this myth is now doesn't have any importance. This myth should totally be rejected. If anybody tell you about other doctors don't tell you anything before signing up, this is not true. So all the information being discussed, all the information gets reviewed, as well as you have whole control of your personal identity, your personal choices. So that's why, I mean, I agree the system is not perfect, but honestly, we rebuild the trust rather than damage it. So we are trying our best, and this is the continuous process. So I just want to highlight that from my personal experience, this has totally changed, and this is just a myth as we started, and there's no significant about this question now. So I will hand over to the next person. Rebecca, if you can take over and give your opinion as well. And if anybody has questions, this is an open platform. Anybody can ask any questions.
Yeah, I think you're right. Just finishing up your kind of point, Kapil, about it's building that trust, isn't it, with people, and that trust is the most important kind of thing, really, because you know, when you kind of do have people coming into a research project that they're not sure about, is that apprehension, and then that can then translate into, you know, in clinical kind of services. If clinical teams not really sure about that research project, then they're going to feel a bit anxious about explaining that to their patients because they don't trust it. So it's that debunking that myth of, you know, you've just got to sign up for it, and once you're in it then, and there's no kind of going back. That's kind of it's not true. Like you said, it's all about that withdrawal process, and the consent process isn't, or it shouldn't be, just a kind of, here's a piece of paper, sign it, and then that's it. The consent process is a process. It's meant to be with a clinical researcher, or, you know, whoever's kind of delegated on that project, to sit with you, to go through it with you, and make sure that everything's, you understand it, you've had the time to read everything. Sometimes I think from my perspective, I found where people will panic and think they've got a certain time frame to agree to this or not. So, and then it's that kind of explain to people, you don't need to tell me yes or no straight away. Go back. You might want to talk about this project with your family. You might want to talk about with lots of other people first before signing up, and that's okay. I know some people, and maybe you've had it in your kind of line, where some people can think that their clinical care could be affected if they don't sign up to a project, or they'll disappoint their doctor. Have you found that, or has that been an anxiety that patients have said to you, that or that you've thought of?
Yeah, Rebecca, you're absolutely right. This is one of the important important thing which we have to highlight, that patient feel that if they don't follow whatever the doctor or the whoever is introducing about the clinical trial is explaining, if they don't follow that means that the clinical care will get affected. They will be neglected. These are the common things, but it is absolutely, as we said, it is a myth. There's nothing like that happens in the real life. We treat all the patients as of our best interest, and we try our best to get the best care possible. The clinical trials is something we offer because to develop the new medicine, new researches, new ways to treat people, but it doesn't mean that the traditional ways are wrong or something is basically wrong with that. So we follow the same principles. We treat all the patients equally.
Yeah, and it's that kind of voluntary participation, isn't it? It's not mandatory, it's voluntary. And often we'll kind of say to our patients that the reason that we're bringing this opportunity to you is to see is it a benefit to you. And looking at the criteria, it looks like you kind of fit into this criteria. Is it something you would like to do, rather than this is what you must do, or like you said, this is something that's better than what you're being offered? Because we don't know. That's the whole point of us to kind of doing the research to check whether or not the intervention or however it is that we're offering is going to be sufficient. So that's just pretty interesting. Do you want me to jump in with my kind of myths then? So I guess mine will be more kind of focused on clinical staff getting involved in research. So I think one of the biggest things I've heard is, as a clinical member of staff, people have said to me, I can't get involved in research because, I guess a few things: budget, time, capacity, but mainly as in we don't kind of know, we don't have the money to run a research project. We don't have the capacity to allow our staff to go forward and kind of get involved and do a lot of extra work. And actually, you don't have to necessarily do that. So, for example, in the NHS, you should have a research team. Is that you? You should have a research team that's in your NHS trust, and you've got the R&D office that you can go to, and they could help you. If you've got an idea of a research project that you want to do yourself, you can go to them and they can support you in finding out kind of the ways that you could either get some funding or to run your own project, or maybe do something that's not research but more like a service evaluation. So you're still getting that data, but it's not as kind of high level and quite complex as it is to kind of get research. And the second thing is the research delivery team that are in the NHS. So that's the team that kind of I'm part of. So I work at Leicestershire Partnership NHS Trust, and I'm working the research delivery team. And one of the things that we do is, for example, universities, pharmaceutical companies or charities will get in touch with us after receiving some funding from the NIHR, so the National Institute of Health Research, to run their research project. And they'll come to us and say, we've got this project, would your trust be interested in taking part? And then it's my job to liaise with the relevant clinical service to see whether or not that's something they want to do. So going back to clinical staff getting involved in research, sometimes it can be quite daunting to do a project on your own and actually go forward with that. So a lot of people that I've kind of worked with quite like coming on board a project that's already, received funding, already well established. So you can come on board. So for example, say if you're kind of working in our team, we would come to your clinical service and say, we're trialing out this we've got this new research project. Would anyone want to be involved? And then we can kind of work with the clinical team to kind of implement that into the service. But it doesn't necessarily mean that your clinical team need to do all of the work. So we have, and you should have in a lot of NHS trusts, a dedicated research delivery team that will come and help you. So for example, we project manage and deliver all the research. So we would then, for example, contact the service, say there's a project going on, would you like to be involved? And if they are, then it's, kind of my job to project manage everything, get a team together, as in our research team, to make sure that we can deliver that project. But we always make sure that, while we're doing a recruitment strategy to check whether or not, this project can be feasible, we try to do it with as little impact on the clinical service as possible. So it means that, the clinical team can still run the project, but it's not going to be too detrimental on their capacity. And sometimes there's projects that have got funding allocated to it as well. So like we're running a project at the moment, it's a stroke rehab project that's got funding allocated. And, we've had some part-time staff do additional hours to do the project, which has been great because they've then had their own staff kind of doing extra kind of, extra credit and kind of getting their skills enhanced by getting involved in this, but it's not being of an impact on the clinical team because they're actually doing this as their extra hours and there's funding available, and it's really exciting. I mean, maybe I'm biased because I work in it, but it's really exciting. There's new, there's training, training that's available. Sometimes there's supervision, there's new interventions. If there is other funding available, that could go towards anything you want to do in your service. So there's a lot of perks really that I don't think many people are aware of, that getting involved with research can come with, and you're not ever going to be on your own. So your research delivery team should support you the entire journey. So anywhere from right at the early stage of setting up the project to project managing it and then delivering it, all the way through to kind of close out. So I guess it's just that kind of myth around if clinical, or if there is anyone that's clinical that is thinking, I really want to get involved in research and I've got a really great idea, or I've seen this project, it looks great, but we don't have the money or we don't have the capacity, then please contact your research team in your trust, because there's going to be a pool of people that are able to help you. And there's also the research delivery network that have the agile team as well, agile research team, I think, or agile delivery team, and they're available as well as researchers to go out and help. So we can, for example, a lot of, I guess I'm talking for like my team, but this will be kind of around everywhere. Is that you? And yeah, they can be kind of anywhere and kind of support in delivering that project.
Yeah, I'm just coming in 5 minutes. Let me just finish the meeting. I'm finishing the meeting and coming back.
Okay, cool. Because he needs an assistant, okay, great. Thank you so much.
So it's just kind of explaining to everyone that there's a lot of support out there, and don't feel like you are having to do this on your own, because you're not. There's a lot of kind of support out there that can kind of help in that way. And obviously it's great because then not only your staff getting extra training, but your patients are receiving an intervention or a therapy that they may not have, won't actually be able to be receiving a normal kind of clinical care. So yeah, that's probably my big kind of myth. I tell people.
It's interesting that actually when you talk about clinical staff and their understanding of clinical trials, obviously as a pharmacist myself and clinician, you don't get in your undergraduate training, there's not a huge emphasis on clinical trials, and it's almost seen as this quite specialist niche area that you go into, and actually I think that is a real myth, and actually everyone can be involved in research and clinical trials, and it doesn't have to be something that consumes your whole sort of Monday to Friday, day to day. Like you said, part-time staff are still doing clinical delivery, but then doing research and clinical trials in addition to that. So I think that's like a real myth, and actually something that clinicians and other healthcare staff would really benefit from understanding a bit more.
I think that's the thing. I mean, I've been to a couple of places as well where you know, people will say we've never been like either told this, or we didn't know this existed, and I mean, we've started to go to some of the junior doctors, like inductions. You know, they're, you know, me and some colleagues there with some research flyers, kind of talking to people about, you know, what we do, and, you know, being those annoying people that pop in on your lunch break. We try not to be too annoying and stay, but again, it's that kind of getting that word out there and explaining, you know, what you can get involved in. I mean, some of our research projects, they've been on the news, and people have contacted us that are actually not even patients in our trust. They've seen about the research project on the news or in social media, and thankfully we're a site so they can come to us, and that's really exciting, you know, to know that you could be part of a project that's, you know, been on BBC News, and it's really life-changing and it's really exciting. But yeah, I think there probably needs to be a bit more awareness, doesn't there, really, around how to get involved, making it more accessible as well, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And maybe actually a myth that people, I mean, I wonder if clinicians think that actually, do you have to be academic or work in academia to be involved in research and clinical trials, which again is a myth, and actually, you know, that isn't necessarily the case. Okay, interesting. I think I'll get into sort of my myth.
Go for it.
So,
Sorry,
like I said,
before we continue, sorry, I need to go back to theatre. Is that all right? I'm so sorry. It's just
of course,
Okay.
yes.
unexpectedly long surgery. We were not planning this, but it's just I have to go back.
That's fine. That's more important.
Yeah, no worries. You really can carry on.
Thank you so much. You guys continue, and
Take
if I
care.
finish, I'll join you. Okay.
Okay.
Sounds
Bye.
good, Will.
Thanks, bye.
Okay, well, that's real life, isn't it?
Yeah.
People come first, patients come first. Okay, so I, like I said, I'm Rena. I am a pharmacist by background, and I also work as a academic research inclusion lead for the NIHR on one of their work streams, which looks at people that live with multiple long-term conditions and designing services and models of care to ensure that people with multiple long-term conditions get the care that they need in the right place at the right time. And I think one of the myths that I commonly come across with some of the inclusion work I'm involved in is that that trials are only for certain groups, or that I'm not meant to be part of a trial. And when we talk about that myth that, you know, clinical trials are for only certain groups, I think we have to probably acknowledge where that's come from. It's not appeared out of anywhere. And for a long time, research did disproportionately involve sort of a narrow slice of the population, and it was often older, white, male, and already sort of deeply engaged within the healthcare system. And I think communities remember that, you know, if people don't look like what you are, then you don't feel like you're represented. And they also remember times that when research was done to them, that couples started to get into rather than with them, and really that communication engagement with people. And I think that historical sort of nature of what we've had with previous trials is part of what we need to get through, in terms of that trials aren't for people like me, and that's not ignorance. It's actually what people's lived experience has been, or what they've seen. And I think the problem is that this myth isn't just inaccurate, it's quite harmful, because if we design trials and if we deliver trials that are only including certain groups, we represent the populations and the diverse populations that as an NHS we serve. So what we end up doing is designing and developing sort of treatments and pathways that are around this particular population group, which doesn't reflect, in the case of sort of multimorbidity, the reality of multimorbidity, or the reality of deprivation, ethnicity, people's gender, age. Women are historically quite underrepresented in trials, and that directly widens health inequalities. But what it also means is actually we don't know if we're testing a drug, for example, whether it's actually representative of the people that we're going to be then giving this drug to. And the people that are at highest risk of poor sort of cardiovascular outcomes are often the ones that are least represented in the research, which is it's a huge sort of issue, but it also just undermines trust. If we're treating people based on evidence, evidence-based medicine, but actually the evidence base doesn't reflect that population that you're actually treating, where it's not right, and we need to be starting to think about how we're designing something that is inclusive. And I think, you know, when we talk about, is this trial for someone like me, will I be safe, will it help my community, I think it's really important to that community part and that community engagement, and really listening to people is really a huge part of rebuilding that trust. And I know we talk about, you know, healthcare professionals, doctors having these conversations, but actually there's something about that trust coming from people within communities and people that are in those grassroots organizations that really understand how communities feel, what they experience, what the culture has on their, like what culture has on, like on impact on their healthcare. So I think it is a myth, because a lot of things are being designed around real lives now, and we are seeing the NIHR, for example, having a huge emphasis on PPI engagement and making sure that we are really including communities. Research inclusion is a huge part of the NIHR ambition, and obviously, as I serve as one of the academic research inclusion leads, but I am just one of many academic research inclusion leads, and a whole strategy around PPIE and research inclusion when it comes to how we're delivering research, but also delivering clinical trials. And I think we're starting to see now that representation is really built into the governance, and lived experience partners are a core part of steering groups, a core part of decision making. And so I guess what I think is really important to say is that clinical trials aren't meant to segregate communities by any sort of dissection, and actually they are for everyone. I think historically we might have seen that they haven't been, but that really is a myth now, and that trials are being inclusive of all different populations, and they're redesigning how trials are being communicated, delivered. We're having to think about how we communicate with people that don't speak English. How are actually we going to be inclusive so that we are representing the entire population. And
can you see, sorry to interrupt, just as you're talking, I just wanted to ask you a question. Can you see that, can you see the progression, you know, from kind of your time kind of working in the field? Can you see how things have kind of got more a bit inclusive, or, you know, obviously where there's still obviously gaps, but can you see that trajectory of
improvement? I can see that. I can really see that. And I think I felt it in that I see a lot more sort of voluntary sector organizations, grassroots organizations being commissioned by NIHR organizations to deliver PPIE, to really hear that voice on the ground of specific communities that are underrepresented in research. So, for example, in my World Around Multiple Long-Term Conditions and Multimorbidity, we're specifically doing a piece of work. We've done a scoping review on models of care for people with multiple long-term conditions. But what's really evident in that review is that there's a real underrepresentation of certain communities, specifically South Asian, Eastern European. We don't see representation of Black Afro-Caribbean, and also sort of people that live in rural communities, Gypsy Roma traveller communities. They're not. They're also not being represented in that literature search, and so actually to address that before we then go on to start to design a model of care, we're starting to do work around actually targeting these communities to really hear their voice and understand what the service should look like for them when it comes to multiple long-term conditions. And we're using voluntary sector, grassroots organizations to be able to do that and to really go out there and speak with those communities. And it's not us doing the speaking, it's other community leaders, faith leaders that are doing those, having those conversations. So I do really see that actually we are seeing a difference. I think there's still some way to go. I think specifically with materials being in other languages. I think there's some way to go around that. Translation is not always the best, but I think there's something about funding being available for materials to be translated. We don't always factor those sorts of costs in when we have funding, and I think it's just really bringing that to the forefront around when we're starting to decide how we would spend our funding, really just thinking, actually, if we're wanting to be really inclusive, we need to think about how we are going to do that. What are the things that we need? And we can only do that by talking to people in communities that we know are underrepresented.
Yeah, 100%. I think, like you said, there definitely needs, because I know in a lot of the projects that are working, you know, we'll have kind of research project come through to us, and it will, you know, but the inclusion exclusion criteria is, you know, say must understand and speak English, but some of the participants, especially if like they're a bit more elderly and English is not their first language, that's a real barrier for them to get included in the project, which is such a shame. But I do know that recently, when I've been talking to a lot of like universities with their projects, they have said to me either kind of, what languages do you want these information sheets translated into, and they've been a lot more you know, inclusive. We've had a few more projects now that say, you know, we've got funding available for translation services. So like one project that I'm running, that's great because I know that I've got information sheets in different languages. I've got translation services available, which means I think already there's a couple of people on one project that I know that I can recruit, and it's great because I can, you know, they can take part as well, which they should have in the first place. But I do think as well, there is still a long way to go, because we, you know, it's sad in one way that I'm getting excited about this, because this should just be the norm. It should just be the norm where this is what's happening, because we're supposed to be inclusive. It shouldn't be me thinking, oh, great, there's 2 projects here out of all these thousands that have, you know, translated their materials and got a translator. So I think there definitely needs to be a bit more of a look into that, and you know, how do the people that did do it well, and you know, what kind of stories could they share? But
I think it is that, isn't it? It's sharing where it's been done well and being able to learn from that. I think there's also something about being inclusive of not just different communities, but of people's real lives, like working age adults that might also be parents and carers, but may want to be part of trials. But, you know, again, a myth around sort of the number of appointments and you have, you know, how you have to attend them and that sort of thing. But, you know, since COVID, we've got a huge shift in how we can deliver appointments and engage with people. We can do, you know, remote webinars, we can do remote consultations. So I think there's something about changing that sort of narrative as well, that actually we can do things where we don't have to always be face to face.
Yeah, and I think actually following on that, one myth is, I think a lot of well, from my perspective, a lot of participants get really anxious about, they think that research is exactly as clinical in terms of if you're, you know, we know that how busy clinical services are, and if you are late to an appointment, most likely it does need to be rescheduled. But I know from research, it is a little bit more flexible in terms of things. And actually we can do, depending on what the protocol says, obviously, but we can do like home visits or remote kind of appointments, or, you know, it's a bit different. It's different in a way. And it's kind of explaining to people that it doesn't necessarily need to be as rigid as you need to come in the hospital. I mean, especially with now the 10-year plan and the kind of the moving towards more of like community wider care settings. So we want to kind of get out in the community, like you said, go to where the people are, not just in hospital, because especially in research, you know, you could be eligible for a project, a research project, and one that would be really great and suitable for you, but you don't get approached because you're not an inpatient, or you've not got, you know, you're not in the hospital. So it's that kind of getting out there. And actually that's I guess if that could be another myth, you know, you've got to be in hospital to seek research. You absolutely don't. We're very aware of kind of moving towards more wider care settings, and like you said, I think especially to make sure that we're, you know, research is kind of inclusive, to go to a lot of different community places to kind of promote research, rather than kind of waiting people to come to us. We kind of go out to them. So yeah, you don't actually need to be either an inpatient or be part of, you know, the hospital to take part in a research project.
And actually, when you think about hospitals, we tend to think if you go into hospital, you're poorly. And I guess that's another myth, actually, is that you don't have to be unwell or have an illness to be part of a clinical trial. Not all clinical trials are sort of phased around that sort of a specific illness. And so actually, that's another myth, actually, that well people can also be part of clinical trials. And I don't think that's probably well spoken about either, actually. And actually, you're probably not catching those people in a hospital because, like you say, they're not coming to hospital because they're not poorly or don't have an outpatient appointment or an inpatient appointment. Yeah. Okay. Well, I was going to go round to each of you, but it's just you, Rebecca.
No pressure.
Yeah, but I'll join in as well. I was going to ask us both then. One thing that we want to take away is sort of we want everyone to be able to take away from our conversation.
Guess one thing I'd like everyone to take away is that if you are a clinical member of staff, please don't think that research is not for you, or it's too academic and you're not academic, so you can't get involved in it, because research is for everyone and you can get involved. And actually, there's lots of different kind of routes you can get involved, and talk to your research and delivery team in the NHS, and do that as a starting point to see how you can get involved. But definitely urge you to kind of do that. Don't stress about it. Don't kind of overthink it. Just kind of make those initial conversations. Yeah, that would be my one thing I'd say.
Thank you. And I guess for me, it's quite short, but just that clinical trials and research need to reflect the people that we're serving as an NHS, which is a very diverse population. So for me, I think one thing to take away is that clinical trials are for everyone, every community, every sex, every age, every gender. Inclusion really isn't optional. It's the foundation of us being able to provide a safe, equitable care within our NHS. So I think for me, that's a really important thing for everyone to take away, and also talk to your families, your peers, anyone that you know. Just always engage people if you can in being open to clinical trials. Is not something that you're going to be a guinea pig for, but actually something that you can be involved with and actually make a difference to how we deliver care. Okay,
yeah,
thank you. Shall we see? Oh, I've lost my mouse here. Shall we see? Oh, there she is. Magna's back.
I am here, just taking consent. Can I join? Very much important for clinical trials, isn't it? A consent.
Absolutely. Consent is hugely important. Yeah.
So now do I have a consent to read some questions?
Absolutely.
Go for it.
Right. So I have this first question. Actually, it's a myth they wanted you to debunk. It's commercial trials mainly exist to serve the interests of pharmaceutical companies.
Okay.
What do you want to
go?
I think it's broader than that, really, because yes, pharmaceutical companies will kind of, do their commercial trials, but there's also a reason behind why they're doing it in the first place. And I know that some of the commercial trials that we've kind of looked at are still of massive patient benefit, that patients get involved in, and they can be offered treatment that they wouldn't normally have been offered in their normal kind of clinical care. And again, it's all around consent in terms of, does that person want to take part? So it's giving someone the opportunity to take part in that kind of commercial project. So if they don't want to do it, then they don't have to do it. That's fine. But if they do want to do it, then I almost feel like, who am I to kind of decline that person then of taking part in that project if I wasn't to kind of promote it? So I think it probably benefits everyone, not just one particular kind of company, is what I would probably say.
I think, yeah, I agree. I think in addition to that is actually that clinical trials, I can see why people think that, because we've heard about, drug trials and when it hits the media and those sort of that reach is always far broader, and when it's a drug company involved. But when industry is involved, I think trials are probably more tightly regulated. They are heavily regulated in terms of medication, sort of the medications that they deliver within the NHS, as well as sort of clinical trials. So they don't get to choose who's recruited or what data you're collecting or how you're reporting that data. There's regulators involved. There'll be independent sort of trial committees and groups that are ensuring that actually the evidence base and the science is robust, and always patient safety will always come first. So I think that's probably what is really key to ensure that everyone understands, is that patient safety is always at the forefront. But I think there's also actually us acknowledging that without trials with commercial partners and with industry, we wouldn't have modern day medicine. We'll hear about all these new drugs that come out, GLP-1s, SGLT2 inhibitors. These are all like groundbreaking drugs in terms of sort of how we manage long-term conditions, but without having clinical trials that have been supported by industry and commercial partners, we wouldn't have those medications. So there's something about how do we ensure that we're ethically working with these companies, and that is really already there. There's huge regulation around those, and I guess that evidence that you get belongs to the NHS, the public, and the evidence that's generated isn't necessarily that belonging to the commercial company.
Right. Thank you both. And next question is actually a query. What about the myth patients enrolled to trials who are not randomized to study receive placebo drug instead of investigational treatment?
What was that? Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, would you mind repeating it?
Yeah, sure. They're talking about a myth, and the myth actually says that if the patient enrolled to clinical trials, randomized clinical trials are something they're talking about. And they have this myth that if the person is not randomized, they might not receive the investigational drug and get placebo instead. What is about? How do we understand the benefit being a part of clinical trial when you're actually
I see.
placebo?
Oh, I see. Yeah. To be fair, we've had this kind of in my experience, and one of the things that we say is that when you're part of a randomized control trial and you're either kind of placebo or the intervention, whether that's a drug or whether it's an intervention, the whole point of us doing the research project is we don't know whether or not that intervention is going to be beneficial than what either you're currently being offered or whatever in general. So it is really important that you have those two groups so that you can do the research project, and then after, when all the analysis is kind of done, we can see whether or not that intervention, for example, that drug, has made a difference. But one thing I would say is that I know a lot of people that have been on projects that we've kind of been involved in, if they are in the placebo kind of group, they're still part of a research team. So they're still getting more support than they may be getting otherwise. So for us, for example, you come into a research project, and if you are on placebo, you're still under our research team. Often we do things like you do like your baseline measures, and then, for example, 3, 6, 9, 12 follow-up questionnaires, which means that you usually have a researcher to come out and have a chat with you, go through the consent, do the first lot of questionnaires, and then see you at different time points. Especially if it's a drug trial, like you'd be under like a research kind of care team. So yeah, I would say that whilst it may be feeling quite disappointed for someone if they've really got their heart kind of set on getting involved in that intervention, you're still part of your support, you're being part of a project that hopefully could, whatever is they're trialing could go on and show to be really successful and actually then be implemented into the NHS further down the line. And you're part of a research, you've got that kind of care team because you're part of the research team, is what I would say. What do you think, Rena?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think when you're part of any clinical trial, like you say, when you're part of any clinical trial, you're more often than not getting more closely monitored than you would have been in sort of routine practice. So if your condition, if it's starts to worsen, or if there's any sort of safety concerns, the investigators can withdraw you from the trial, or you can withdraw yourself from a trial. Like we said earlier, you're not stuck in there. You can withdraw yourself, and you can be given, I guess, whatever clinically appropriate treatment there is. But I think it's really important that actually to be able to understand whether a certain drug or medication works, we need to be able to compare it to, a blind someone that's not taking the drug. The only way to do that is to have blinded trials and randomized control trials, and that prevents bias, doesn't it? And that's what we need to do to make sure that whatever evidence we are generating and what results we're getting are trusted. And I guess at the end of the study, the participants are always told which group they were in at the end of the study as well, so you will know. And in most cases, actually, if the treatments that you were being tested against was effective, you can be offered that treatment afterwards. But I think it's really important that we do have placebo groups. But like I said, I think you are always, more often than not, you're getting more care than what routine care would be anyway, because you're more closely monitored.
And also, just to note that I know we're talking about kind of medication, but a lot of clinical research doesn't always necessarily mean a drug trial. So, for example, you could be in the placebo group, but it could actually be usual care arm. So, for example, it could be that we're trialing out a new type of talking therapy. So it could be a different type of talking therapy or a type of physiotherapy program versus your usual care. So sometimes people can still be offered a treatment. It will just be what they're usually being offered rather than nothing at all. So that's just something to note as well. It doesn't always need to be kind of a drug trial or completely nothing. It could just be your usual care versus the new novel kind of intervention that they're researching.
That's a really good point, yeah. Any more questions, Meghna?
Sorry, I was on mute. So this answered the questions of Dave and Sneha. Now we have 3 more questions, and I'm also mindful about the time. So let's do it quickly. The next question is by Henry, and he is asking, how do we interest pharmaceutical companies in Europe to conduct clinical trials in Africa to explore markets in Africa, ensuring that product fits the African race?
So we're asking, how do we engage pharmaceutical companies across Europe to conduct trials in Africa?
You're right.
Okay. Wow. I think that's something about sort of engaging policy institutes around how we can make sure that we are representative. I think we're talking about, I don't know, Rebecca, feel free to come in. I think
I think to be honest, I'm not actually quite sure. I think it's about, I guess, collaboration and kind of networking and talking to different people, and maybe speaking to other people in that kind of field and see how they got on, and see how you could implement that in your own kind of field. But I'd probably say talking to other people that may be in different kind of fields to you, and maybe not in, where you are, but see kind of how they worked it, and then see how you can kind of implement that. But I'd probably say conversations. I mean, I always think that the best way to get anywhere is just to talk to lots of different people and get their ideas and like kind of how they did XYZ, and see how that streamlines with your own, how you kind of work. So maybe collaboration and kind of networking and talking to different people to see how you can move forwards.
I agree. Yeah, networking with any sort of UK-based sort of African networks that can also help you lobby to have those conversations with those with commercial sort of companies that you might want to be. I mean, I guess there's pharmaceutical companies is broad, and it might be a specific pharmaceutical company that you're wanting to engage. But yeah, lobbying your networks and having those conversations is probably key.
Right. The next question is from Sweta. She has actually two. I'll just read both so you can just answer at your pace. So her first question is, how do clinical research teams balance scientific rigor with patient-centered care during clinical trials? And her second question is, what are the most common misconceptions people from academic research background have when they are transitioning into clinical trial research?
Okay.
Okay. So the first one was about balancing scientific rigor with patient safety and patient needs. Okay. So I guess that's an important responsibility of all clinical research teams, because we need to make sure that whatever we are doing is safe for patients, and we need robust unbiased data to be able to do that. So there's always a process involved, and there's a huge amount of governance that's involved in sort of the day-to-day running of a trial. I think we've already touched on that in some of the conversations, but there's always a protocol, and it probably always starts with a protocol. It's designed around real people, not ideal patients, I guess. So like Rebecca mentioned, there's always eligibility criteria. So there'll be inclusion and exclusion criteria. Informed consent is a huge part of that. And I don't think, what I mean by informed consent is it's not just a signature, it is really a whole process around what we were talking about with Gopil, giving that real information, giving people time to think, ask questions, and then during the trial, safety always comes first. So like we've said, people can withdraw at any time if they experience side effects or if they experience sort of adverse care, then that people can choose to withdraw themselves from trials, and equally clinicians can also suggest that people remove themselves from trials. I think there's a robust governance that goes into clinical trials to ensure that we're getting the scientific evidence base that we need, but also that patient safety is always at the forefront. I don't know if there's anything you'd add, Rebecca.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's using your own kind of clinical judgment as well. You know, if there's a project going on, you know, talk to your patients about that kind of research project, but also use your own kind of clinical judgment to see whether or not the kind of the project would be beneficial, and have that two-way dialogue conversation. But like Rena says, there's always a robust, I mean, we have, you know, the project, but by the time it gets to us to actually deliver it, it has gone through every single scrutiny you can think of. You know, it isn't just something that someone's thought, oh, this sounds like a fun idea, let's just do a project. It's gone through every rigorous, you know, scrutiny you could think of. It has all the ethical kind of approvals, got Health Research Authority approvals. It goes through quite an intense, you know, procedure before it gets to us to deliver the project. But again, even when it does, it's then, you know, it's up to us then to have that conversation with the patients and explain to them basically kind of what we'd mentioned earlier as well, around people can withdraw at any time, it's voluntary. The whole purpose of bringing research to patients is, you know, would you like to kind of take part? It might be beneficial for you, but there's no, you know, I mean, I work a lot with young people as well. And often I say to, you know, the kids, even if, I want to sign up. And even there and then I'll say, you know, even if in the car ride home you think, oh, actually I didn't want to say anything like to Becky, or I didn't really want to do it, I said, just tell mum or dad and just give me a ring. Like it's fine. And then you could almost see as you're talking, they're like, oh yeah, okay then, because it's you know, you want to explain it's not this kind of scary thing. This whole purpose is to hopefully this will be beneficial for you. So so it's just kind of explaining that and making sure that people know that it's within their right. It's completely voluntary, and they can withdraw at any time. Sorry, I know I waffled then, and we've only got 1 minute left.
Right, that pretty much explains everything. Do you have any closing remarks before I just wind up? Like, we are on time, so.
I think for me is, no question is a silly question. So if you've got a question about clinical trials, just ask, because, you know, more often than not, everyone has also got that same question. And you can learn a lot from being involved in clinical trials. So yeah, ask if you've got questions about them, and if you are involved with them, share with communities, people that you're close to. Yeah, that's probably mine.
Yeah, I think I would kind of say the same, really. I guess a closing remark would be, please don't feel like research is not for you, because research is for everyone. And actually, if you have never done any kind of academic stuff in your life, that's absolutely fine as well. You don't need to go through that academic route to kind of get involved in research. There's loads of different routes you can get involved, and it's really exciting, and we love talking about it, and we love including everyone in it and listening to everyone else's stories and how your clinical work is, etc. So please feel free to get in touch and chat with us, because yeah, don't feel like you can't ask questions or anything like that, because that's the whole point of research. And a lot of the time we do research because we don't know the answers. That's why we're researching it. So no one knows everything, and that's the whole point. So yeah, share, talk, and all kind of get involved.
Right. Before we close the session, we have a giveaway. So our participants will definitely get some gifts for their time. So I'll ask each of you to shoot some questions so they can answer them on our LinkedIn page, and the best answer will get the rewards.
Okay. As in, we need to ask a question to the audience.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. Oh, let's have a think there.
Yeah. So you can think, because the gifts are expensive. One gonna get a £20 gift voucher, and the other gonna get a merchandise kit set. So yeah, they can work hard a bit.
Okay.
So my question is, how do we address oh gosh, this is very much on the spot, isn't it? Okay, how do we ensure that trials reflect the complexity of real world people and not ideal patients?
That's a good one. I would say, how can we support our clinical staff to get involved in research and push to do their own kind of research projects? That's what I'd ask.
Nice. Thank you so much. Really, really interesting and a productive session it was. Thank you so much for your time, guys. And definitely, I'm sure couple surgery is a success. So everything ends, I mean, if it is well, it ends well. So everything is well. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
Have a good evening. Bye.
Bye. See you. Thank you. That's all for today, guys. Thank you so much for your time. It's lovely having you. You are interested and curious about clinical trials, then just download Proper, look about us, and get enrolled on our trials, because we are matchmakers and we match participants to clinical trials. Who knows, you could be the next participant in our clinical trial. Good luck. Take care. Thank you so much. Good evening.